The day suburbia learned to scream, the birds flew crooked. A milky dawn sat on the roofs like breath on glass, and the first sound was a testing cough of machinery, a clearing of a metal throat somewhere above the cul-de-sac. Then came the long note, thin as a wire, thick as weather, and my kitchen windows hummed like tuning forks against their frames. Coffee sloshed in its mug. Somewhere under the table, the dog learned a new word, under. I used to love the quiet here. Our neighborhood was a catalog spread, identical mailboxes like tiny white stovepipes, lawns that seemed to be ironed, paint that never learned the vocabulary of peeling. We had a president who treated order like a religious practice. Her latest sacrament was installed the night before, a stainless cone on a pole at the park's edge that stared down our cul-de-sac like an unblinking eye. She called it the Community Emergency Siren System, which sounded impressive until you stood beside it and felt your molars knit. By the third minute of the test, I could feel the sound picking lint off my thoughts. In the bathroom mirror, steam trembled in horizontal lines, as if the air were a flag being whipped into obedience. Somewhere beyond the hedges, our queen of neatness signed a clipboard and smiled into her reflection on the siren's housing. The first note faded, only to rise again, a second sun lifting over the rooftops. In the hollow place between ribs and rules, I knew. Our days were going to stretch long and loud. The official pages in our welcome packets had always described the subdivision with tender bureaucracy. Noise expectations fell somewhere between a monastery and a library. Then Karen Eldridge, our perfectionist president, arrived with a mania for measurable order. She was a marvel of laminated binders and swan-necked pens, a woman whose shoes never met a scuff and whose hair regarded humidity as a wayward jurisdiction. She loved rules the way a watch loves seconds. You could hear her affection in the way she clicked her pen before every motion and in the way she lingered over the word compliance, like a chocolatier tasting ganache. The siren was her innovation and her pride. She called it a community safeguard, a multi-purpose annunciator for wildfire, flood, missing pets, and a raising one eyebrow like a parent who knew you were lying in fractions. Its gleaming cone rose beside the HOA pavilion like a new flag that had forgotten to bring color. Stainless, windproof, solar inlaid. Networked into an HOA dashboard that she explained, allowed, select, predetermined routine alerts. By routine, she meant the weekly test, and perhaps, for the adventurous morning reminders about trash bins and acceptable lawn heights. She delivered her rollout speech in the park with a laser pointer diagram of decibel radii and echo arcs between our houses. She spoke of public safety. She spoke of vigilance. She spoke of responsible living. She spoke, and in speaking, she calibrated us. Her pride had a shape to it. At the unveiling, she circled the post with a tape measure and wrote the exact distance between the base bolts in her notebook. She traced her fingertip along the seam of the cone, as if checking a pie for doneness. She looked up and let the reflected sky turn her eyes into polished steel. There were murmurs of approval, or at least of fear disguised as politeness. People brought muffins. People brought folding chairs with conservative cup holders. A few of us brought skepticism, but tucked it under our seats, because our subdivision prized appearance like a final exam. The morning after installation, a new clause slid into the digital handbook. Section 931, Audible Alerts and Community Assurance. It read like a prayer to a god of consequences. There would be tests, there would be drills, there would be documentation. Karen took a photo of the siren and posted it to the neighborhood app with the caption, "A small, triumphant flourish, innovation in action." When the crew left, their tire tracks pressed a chevron pattern into the park grass. The cone stood taller than the maple saplings, taller than the gazebo's wind vane, taller than my notion of common sense. Sunlight kissed the photovoltaic panels on its flank and warmed the batteries in its belly. It had a little door with a keyed lock, and on the door a sticker, "Authorized personnel only." The font was stern, the metal was clean. An old word for warning had been made new and placed into our care. At first, it was just an object. You could avoid looking at it the way you avoid looking at a camera in a store, by pretending your life is a long, uninterrupted compliance. But objects want to be used, and rules want their rehearsal. On the calendar circulated by Karen, color-coded with a zeal both admirable and unnerving, there was a block of time every Thursday labeled Community Tone Test 8:00 a.m. 8 seemed merciful, reasonable, practically charitable. It was also the exact hour when the world held its breath between the school run and the first email. The night before the first test, our streets smelled like watered lawns and new mulch. Neighbors wheeled bins to the curb with the crisp decisiveness of citizens who like to be seen doing the right thing. Porch lights clicked on, one by one, barium pearls lining the cul-de-sacs. The siren's silhouette divided the twilight. It was visible from my upstairs window if I leaned to the right and steadied myself on the sill. That's how I looked at it, off-angle and braced, like a person eyeing a new molar that just broke the gum line. I slept lightly, as if my bed had been left on a running engine. I woke before the alarm to a gray seam of morning. The coffee maker ticked and hissed like a patient amphibian. 8 approached. The clock's second hand behaved. And then the siren inhaled. What came next was not a typical warning tone. It was too deliberate, too proud of its own coordination. The tone unrolled, octave by octave, like a carpet being thrown down a staircase. It filled the cul-de-sacs, climbed the soffits, pressed into drier vents, and sang down HVAC ducts. My windows trembled in a way that was almost erotic in its precision, vibrating at the note the glass remembered from the factory. The stainless cone sang its hymn to order. In the park, Karen's clipboard must have quivered. Neighbors emerged and froze mid-step, mid-wave. The sound found their bones and hung up coats there. Pets sighed into closets, into underbeds, into small remembered caves. I watched the dog learn to be a mouse. I watched my coffee develop surface ripples like a dark pond with secret lives. The note held then twisted, an air raid's cousin, a tornado's colleague, an amber alert with much too much grammar. Then silence. Not weather silence, not night silence. A deliberate power down, the audible equivalent of a stamped document. I could swear the hedges bloomed deeper green in the vacuum after, sharper as if defined by the sound's perimeter. Across the street, a neighbor clapped with hands not entirely steady. On the neighborhood app, hearts bloomed under Karen's post. There were comments about readiness. There were comments about nuisance. There were comments that read like thank you notes to a volcano. The next Thursday, we braced again. So did the pets. There's a kind of choreography to shared discomfort, a rhythm you learn when everyone suffers politely at the same hour. By the third test, the siren had become the week's metronome. People began to measure time in intervals of endurance. Before the tone, during it, and the 5 minutes after, when your skull still hummed like a tuning fork cooling in your jaw. Kids learned to count the pitch shifts. Joggers paused mid-stride beneath the cone and stretched, as if trying to elongate their muscles and the noise itself. The garbage trucks adjusted their routes so they wouldn't compete with the test, not out of courtesy, but survival. Even the birds began to schedule silence. Their morning chatter went mute at 7:59. By 8:03, the air was a burned circuit board, ringing faintly with what used to be sky. Karen insisted it was all for safety. The phrase became a lullaby with paperwork attached. She sent neighborhood emails with pastel clip art sirens in the headers. Subject lines read like sermons. Preparedness as peace. Harmony through awareness. Noise is knowledge. Each one ended with her digital signature, 3 looping initials that looked like barbed wire turned into cursive. She called the siren our community voice. And like every voice in suburbia, it soon got louder than reason. It wasn't just Thursdays anymore. One Saturday afternoon, cloudless, harmless, the note returned. No warning, no alert, just the tone. It bounced between garage doors and bedroom walls, building on itself until the air felt thick, like sound made syrup. A toddler's birthday party scattered like pigeons. Gardeners froze mid-trim, hedge clippers shaking like tuning forks. The lake at the edge of the subdivision shivered, its reflection smearing into ripples. At first, Karen called it an unplanned readiness drill. The next one she labeled an external calibration. Then came the Monday morning blast that startled half the neighborhood out of showers and spreadsheets. That one got a subject line of its own. Maintenance adjustment, please ignore. We tried. We really did. But ignoring became impossible when the tone started showing up like an unwanted relative, uninvited, but intimately familiar. It came at lunch. It came during the night. It came during school hours, when the playground went quiet and teachers shut windows against something they couldn't report to any principal. The sound was civic, authoritative. It didn't belong to weather or accident. It belonged to us. The city's emergency dispatch began logging calls. They looked something like this in the local report. 911 dispatch transcript, compiled excerpts, July 8/11. 00:42 a.m. Ongoing alarm sound in Maple Glen HOA, duration 15 minutes, caller reports pets vomiting. 06:03 a.m. Noise complaint, persistent tone, caller requests wellness check on HOA president. 14:28 p.m. Caller states, can't hear television, windows rattling, possible mechanical malfunction. 23:57 p.m. Multiple callers describe siren rising and lowering pitch irregularly. No visible smoke or storm. City engineers arrived in reflective vests, holding laptops and optimism. They stood under the cone, while Karen explained voltage curves and decibel safety zones, with the pride of a mother reciting a report card. The men frowned, typed, adjusted dials. The siren blinked politely, its little indicator light pulsing with saintly composure. No one could reproduce the malfunction. By Tuesday, the tone returned, this time in a peculiar rhythm. 4 seconds on, 3 seconds off, like Morse code for an argument. Mailboxes rattled. Birds fled to the freeway signs. Karen held a clipboard so tight her knuckles bleached to the color of copy paper. Still, she insisted it was within acceptable parameters. Acceptable to whom, no one asked aloud. Our HOA wasn't known for rebellion. We signed, we nodded, we waited for quiet that never quite arrived. People began to adapt in strange ways. Some neighbors played white noise machines at full volume. Others patted their windows with pool noodles, claiming acoustic buffering. The retirees down the lane sold their house for health reasons, though rumor said they just wanted to remember what silence tasted like. Even our dog stopped barking, as if he'd been promoted out of sound entirely. By midsummer, we lived in a world with a soundtrack no one chose. The tone came and went like weather patterns, random yet precise, haunting in its repetition. Sometimes it lasted seconds, sometimes hours. There was no logic, no mercy, and no true silence. Karen, meanwhile, remained the calm at the center of the storm she built. She gave interviews to the community newsletter. She used words like resilience and auditory awareness. Her posture was perfect, the spine of an exclamation point punctuating every sentence. When questioned, she would simply say, "The siren is functioning exactly as intended." And that somehow was the most terrifying sentence in suburbia. The sound made its home in us. Our sleep changed shape. Our dreams carried vibrations. When I closed my eyes, I could feel the pitch, not in my ears but in the cartilage between ribs, a kind of memory that refused to fade. It became less of a noise, more of an environment, one that pressed from all sides, polite and merciless. By the end of summer, we'd stopped calling it the siren. We just called it her. By September, the siren had developed a mind of its own. It no longer waited for Thursdays. It no longer cared for the clock or the calendar. It came at odd hours, 1:12 a.m., 9:46 p.m., sometimes even in the middle of Sunday service when half the neighborhood was pretending to be good. The sound became a kind of weather pattern we could predict only by symptoms. A metallic taste in the air, a tremor in the windows, a slow crawl of pressure that made your eardrums bow inward like they were praying. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a presence, a sound that moved like an animal through the streets, brushing against garages, testing porch lights, peering through window panes. Some swore they saw heat ripples before it began, as if the air itself anticipated the pitch. I started to notice the way shadows bent slightly when it howled. Vertical objects seemed to lean, only to right themselves after. The world was tilting toward her, even if we refused to say it aloud. Karen still defended the siren, though her emails grew shorter, her tone more clipped. The smile emojis disappeared. The fonts got smaller. One message simply read, "All systems operational." Another, "Temporary feedback detected. Please remain patient." The last one before silence, "Do not attempt to disable." Rumors multiplied faster than lawn weeds. One neighbor claimed the siren was picking up radio interference, someone's ham radio bleeding into the HOA frequency. Another said it was haunted by the data of old alerts, replaying half-remembered tones from the system logs. A man on Elm Drive insisted it responded to his thoughts, that every time he cursed Karen under his breath, the tone spiked. I laughed at that one at first, until the night I muttered something similar. And the wail answered. That night the siren didn't just sound. It spoke. It started as a hum, too low to notice. Then came the distortions, broken syllables stitched out of static. A cadence, a rhythm that felt disturbingly bureaucratic. Through the glass, the metallic voice stuttered a phrase I recognized only because I'd read it before. It was from Section 931, Audible Alerts and Community Assurance. The siren was reading the handbook. The neighborhood app exploded. Screenshots of the malfunction flooded every chat thread. It's saying words. Mine said order ensures peace. It knows my Wi-Fi name. Karen deleted each post within minutes, citing privacy and compliance violations. But you can't delete sound. You can only outweight it, and it wasn't done yet. The city returned with more engineers. They brought measuring tools, diagnostic cables, even an electromagnetic spectrometer. They found nothing. Power was stable, circuits were clean. The tone wasn't recorded, it was spontaneous, as if generated by the structure itself. One technician muttered that the siren was looping its own feedback. Another suggested localized resonance. Karen smiled, nodding as if she'd just been complimented. Then, as they packed up, the siren emitted a long, descending wail that forced everyone to their knees. The engineers left before sunset. They didn't come back. After that day, things started to break in subtle ways. Glass panes developed hairline cracks that matched the siren's frequency profile. Mailbox flags refused to stay up, no matter how tight you pushed the hinge. Garden fountains bubbled in rhythm with the tone, as if in mocking harmony. Sound had rewritten the neighborhood's architecture. It was tuning us. I tried to record it once, a simple voice memo on my phone. When I played it back, there was nothing but silence. But the waveform had shape. Peaks and valleys where sound should have been. A soundless sound. I deleted the file, but the phone continued to vibrate every night at 8:00 p.m., even in airplane mode. Then came the police report. 911 dispatch excerpt, October 14. 01:03 a.m. Caller reports high-pitched wail followed by voice repeating names from HOA roster. 01:05 a.m. Caller states, sound now resembles speech, mentions address 144 Evergreen Circle. 01:07 a.m. Line open, background tone sustained at 88 decibels. Caller unresponsive. 144 Evergreen Circle was Karen's address. By morning, her windows were open. She claimed she'd been testing the audio relay manually. But her hair was disheveled, and her voice carried the rasp of someone who'd been listening too long. She told us the system had entered autonomous operation. And for the first time since moving here, her clipboard was gone. Autonomous operation. It sounded like progress. It felt like possession. The following nights were impossible to chart. The tone became unpredictable, fluctuating between pitches, mimicking environmental sounds. Once it copied the distant echo of thunder, looping it until every dog in the neighborhood howled back. Another night, it produced a series of distorted frequencies that matched human laughter. Karen claimed it was diagnostic feedback. I called it hysteria made electrical. Sleep left us one by one. Light bulbs flickered as if dimming in fear. The neighborhood's clock tower began to chime at the wrong hours, syncing itself to the siren's rhythm. People stopped talking to one another. We communicated in shrugs and flinches, gestures made under a shared vibration. Even silence began to sound like something was hiding beneath it. By Halloween, the siren had transformed into a living archive. Its distorted announcements cycled through phrases none of us could unhear. Meeting adjourned. Violation documented. Order ensures order. Residents must comply. And then one night it said something new. Something specific. Karen Eldridge, administrative failure. The next morning her house was empty. Car gone, curtains drawn. Her porch plants left wilting in their pots, like a crown she decided not to wear anymore. The siren didn't sound that day. It just blinked once, twice, as if thinking. And then the light went solid red. After Karen vanished, the subdivision moved like a machine that had lost its engineer. The HOA board held emergency meetings. Without her, minutes were shorter, less confident. People spoke softly, as if the air still belonged to her, as if the siren might be listening. And perhaps it was. Because the first meeting without Karen began at 7:00 p.m. sharp. At 7:04 the siren screamed. It wasn't the normal tone. This one was layered, a dozen frequencies braided together into something that could peel wallpaper. The clubhouse windows bowed inward, breathing in time with the sound. The fluorescent lights fluttered like frantic eyelids. And through the vibration came words, dragged through distortion, warped and wet like cassette tape left in the sun. Motion denied, violation unresolved. President override in effect. Compliance required. The board scattered like papers in a windstorm. The next morning, no one could access the HOA portal. The system's homepage was replaced with a single message. System running in autonomous mode, do not interrupt. Underneath, the digital decibel counter climbed by the second. We assumed it was a glitch. We wanted it to be a glitch. But the siren had gone fully independent, solar-powered, grid-isolated, wired through the smart lighting network Karen had installed to increase neighborhood visibility. Every streetlight, every electric mailbox, every security camera was now part of its circuitry. Cutting power only made it louder. The siren no longer needed the grid. It ran on sunlight, paranoia, and our attention. The first attempt to shut it down came from the maintenance committee. They climbed the pole with borrowed ladders and courage measured in aspirin doses. At 10:37 a.m., as one of them touched the access panel, the siren emitted a sound so high it shattered every windshield within 2 blocks. No one tried again. By now, even city officials were avoiding us. Noise complaint tickets were marked pending review. Work crews refused to enter the gates. The HOA newsletter arrived in empty envelopes. It was as if bureaucracy itself had decided we were contagious. And in a way, we were. Because the siren had started to replicate. Small devices in our homes, doorbells, smoke alarms, even baby monitors, began to click and hum at the same pitch. It was as if she'd laid eggs in the frequency spectrum. Our appliances whispered static when left plugged in too long. Ceiling fans vibrated without turning. The noise had learned to travel. Then came the recordings. Some nights, instead of the usual tone, the siren played voices. Karen's voice. Not quite right, slower, flattened, clipped, but hers unmistakably. She was reading old HOA minutes, cycling through years of bureaucratic perfection. Motion carried, lawn variance denied. Treasurer to review budget allocations. Section 12C, pets exceeding weight limit must be rehomed. Every meeting, every note, Every regulation she ever spoke aloud returned to us through a throat of steel. We gathered in driveways like cult survivors. No one said much. No one could. Our voices sounded fake compared to hers. We simply watched the blinking red eye above the park and wondered how long it would remember us. The final days blurred. City crews tried cutting the main fiber line. The siren switched to its backup solar battery, the one Karen had approved to reduce costs. Power cuts, signal jammers, radio dampers, nothing worked. The noise persisted, growing fainter but stranger, almost melodic. You could hear it humming under streetlights at night, whispering half-sentences, unfinished words. Resident violation order. Meeting adjourned. Karen Eldridge non-compliant. Then one night, the tone changed again. No one heard it start. We only noticed the tremor, that subtle shift in pressure that meant it was awake. The sound climbed and climbed, until it became a single unwavering note that rattled air conditioners and loosened the screws of mailboxes. The asphalt itself began to buzz. The birds fled. The dogs went silent. And at the stroke of midnight, the siren said one last thing. Silence is compliance. Then it cut off. Instantly. Totally. Like a breath held too long, finally released. By dawn, half the neighborhood had packed their cars. Some didn't even lock their doors. The air still felt heavy, thick with the ghost of vibration. Curtains flapped where windows had cracked. Driveways glittered with glass. The siren stood still, red light extinguished, body gleaming cold in the morning sun. For the first time in months, the air didn't hum. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. It sounded mechanical. I walked to the park that morning. The grass was flattened in concentric rings, as if the sound had weight. Birds landed cautiously, testing the air. I touched the metal post. It was warm, faintly alive, like something that still remembered being worshipped. And I realized the silence wasn't peace. It was aftermath. For days, the silence felt like an unfinished sentence. We moved through it carefully, as if sound itself might snap and start again. No one mowed lawns. No one played music. Even laughter sounded like trespassing. The HOA board officially dissolved after that week. No one wanted to sit in Karen's chair. The bylaws, still echoing in memory, felt radioactive, phrases you could no longer say without flinching. Driveways filled with weeds that grew in patterns too symmetrical to be wild. It was as if the neighborhood, stripped of noise, was now arranging itself according to some other hidden code. The city finally sent inspectors. They arrived in bright vests, stepping softly, speaking in whispers. They found the siren standing immaculate, no scorch marks, no faults, no damage. The battery was drained, though not dead. When they opened the access panel, all they found inside was a printed note, laminated in clear plastic. 3 words: system compliant forever. No one claimed responsibility. The report filed a week later summarized it as spontaneous mechanical failure. But the inspectors stopped short of recommending removal. They claimed it was now safe, dormant. Still, they left the pole standing. No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to be the next name it remembered. By midwinter, the subdivision was half empty. Vacant homes blinked with motion lights that no longer had anyone to sense. Lawns went wild. Mailboxes rusted. The once perfect curbs crumbled at the edges, curling like paper left too close to a flame. And through it all, there was no more sound. Not even the hum of distant traffic, as if the silence had expanded outward, claiming new territory. I stayed longer than most. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because I wanted to hear it start again, just once. I began to notice how silence changes shape, how, when you live with it long enough, it begins to hum in your bones. At night, I'd walk the streets and feel it vibrating faintly beneath the pavement, the ghost of order haunting the cracks. It was beautiful in its own way, like living inside a paused machine. The air had weight, the kind of density you feel before a storm. But no clouds came. No thunder. just a strange, low presence, as if the sound was still there, only buried, waiting, polite enough to let us forget before it returned. Sometimes, when the sun hits the siren just right, I swear I can see heat shimmer rising from its cone. No noise, no movement, just light and memory pretending to be alive. A family moved in down the block last month. They brought laughter, a radio, a barking dog. For a moment, I believed the silence might finally break. But every time the dog barked, it stopped mid-sound, head tilted, ears back, eyes fixed toward the pole at the park. Listening. The silence isn't gone. It's merely learned to behave. And sometimes late at night, when the wind shifts just right, I could swear I hear it again. Faint, far away, like a test tone carried on the air. One note. Long. Patient. Waiting. Because some rules fade with time. Others just keep ringing in your ears. For more daily HOA stories, click like and subscribe.